This week on Quality Digest Live, Economics 101 sheds some light on how United Airlines could have prevented their recent PR disaster.
Indeed.
You know the one I'm talking about.
That's right. Plus, we welcome Mike McLean of ISO's Technical Management Board Task Force, who will join us in an extended discussion about the high-level structure of management system standards. That and more when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is brought to you by Mitutoyo America. Whatever your metrology challenges, Mitutoyo supports you from start to finish.
And welcome back to Quality Digest Live for April 21st, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
Yes, that's you are. And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. And we have a special guest in the studio with today, Mike McLean from Australia. He is actually a member of ISO's Technical Management Board task groups, one of the task groups for the ISO Technical Management Board. We'll be talking to Mike here a little bit later on about why he's here and get into some questions about the high-level structure on ISO, as well as the integrated use management
system standards.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
IUMSS.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I was trying to spell what it was, but I can't even get that right, so think about it. All right.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
All right. Well, before we get into today's first story,
What we want to remind everybody out there, though, before we get there, because Mike is going to be joining us, you said, in about 10 minutes. We've got a couple stories first. If you want to ask Mike questions, Mike has some really good information for all of us that we want to share with you. So if you have a question for Mike about the high-level structure in particular, email us now at qdl@qualitydigest.com. You see it right there. And we'll get him to Mike during the show. Mike will be on with us about 10 after for his segment. So get the questions up now, and then we'll ask him of Mike on the air.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. I forgot to do that. All right, okay. So what do you think is the most important step of Plan, Do, Check, Act, PDCA?
Check.
What about you, Mike? PDCA, which one's most important?
Probably plan.
Probably plan, all right. Well, that is the question, actually. I'm glad you guys both chipped in there. That is the question actually asked by Greg Cresswell in his article. What is the most important step in PDCA? Boy, I'm having some real problems today. Well, let's take a quick look at each and see if we can kind of suss this out a little bit. So we're going to look at each plan, do, check, and out. So first of all, there is plan. This is actually, if you think about it, the foundation for the entire process, right? I mean, if you don't have a strategic plan with goals and steps in place, how will you know what you're working towards, says Cresswell? And this is probably the most commonly skipped step. And unfortunately, if it's ignored, your process is going to fail. I mean, so you got to really think, well, plan. So plan seems pretty important. Well, then there's do. This is where things, get done.
There you go.
So the argument for do is that it's the most important step because if it's skipped, nothing happens and there is no process to begin with. So, okay, well, do is pretty important. Then there's check. Checking confirms that you're on target to do what you said you would do. Without this step, there is no way to know if you're on track. The process can still function, but at the end of the year, you may find that you haven't achieved your goal, says Cresswell. So, I mean, that one sounds pretty important too.
I think so.
And then finally, there's act. So here is where you think about what went well and what could have gone better. So, if you think about it, it triggers continuous improvement. And this step is critical for standardizing the parts of the process that are working and tweaking the parts of the process that maybe need a little bit more attention. If this isn't done, you're not running a process, just a program. So, I don't know, I mean, kind of if you think about it, there isn't one that's any more important than the other. If you leave any of them out, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, it's a unified process. It's a closed loop system, really. If you think about it, you keep on going back to the start as you go around, round and round and round. Yeah.
And I mean, well, and Mike, you've told me that you've actually got some problems with kind of Plan, Do, Check, Act or Plan, Do, Study Act, or
and ISO 9001 talks about this as a flexible type thing. It actually says you can use Plan, Do, Check, Act. You don't have to use it. So for those organisations that have been doing Lean or Six Sigma or any other improvement methodology, Kaizen, and they're happy with that, and it's in the context of their organisation, they can still use it. Okay. I drove up here, as you know, yesterday, and it said, please check your speed.
Oh, your car told you?
Yeah, well, the sign says, check. So I checked my speed, making sure I wasn't doing kilometres. Right. But I don't study my speed, otherwise I can't drive. Right. So for organisations that want to do voice of the process, they have to study the process. And checking the product at the end with a gauge or a no-go gauge and all those types of things. And I think that's kind of okay. So ISO 9000 was very flexible. If you want to use whatever suits you, there's no mandatory requirement. And that's what I think is very powerful in the ISO 9001-2015, okay, that you can use whatever you like.
And we'll talk about that. Actually, we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. So again, kind of what Mike was saying there, if it makes sense, to plan, do, check act, or plan, do, study act, or anything that's kind of related to that is kind of, they're all integral, they're all important in to make sure that your process is verifiable and that you're doing what you say you're going to be doing, and that there's kind of a circularity, a feedback that goes into this.
Yeah, feedback loop, and they all feed off of each other, like you're saying. No one in isolation is more or less important than the others, but if you miss any of them, you're really not doing the process properly.
You got it.
That's the moral of the story, I think. All right, well, this next article is timely, I think, and it's also, actually it also was very nearly quite ironic, because you see my partner Dirk over here almost missed today's show due to a delay in a flight getting out of Detroit late last night. You just about made it, Dirk. You just got it.
Just you and Mike here.
5
Mike
minutes.
and Mike.
That's right. Well, the irony comes because this next piece addresses the sad and ongoing saga of how not to do customer service, as illustrated by our friends at United Airlines. To refresh our collective memories, as if any of us could ever forget, a few weeks back, a video made the rounds showing a United Airlines passenger being dragged off a flight in which he was seated with a valid boarding pass, mind you. The issue was that United had overbooked the flight and needed the passenger seat. When he didn't go willingly, United security dragged him off, to the consternation of first the couple of dozen passengers on the flight, and then to the horror of millions more that soon witnessed the event on computer screens and devices across the world.
And actually, we should say that was actually not United Security, but Airport Security.
Airport Security, I'm sorry, yes, you're correct.
Yeah, that's true.
It was, I think you can say pretty clearly, a customer service fiasco of the first order, and in true 21st century style, it almost immediately went viral, everybody with their cell phones. Well, the circumstance was really unnecessary, however, according to Volodymyr Bilotkach, an airline economist. United had some relatively low-cost options to deal with this issue before it became a widely distributed problem. Their failure to do so may end up resulting in millions of dollars in costs through lawsuits and untold millions more in brand and reputational damages. In his article, How Economics 101 Could Have Prevented United's PR Nightmare, which you see right there, which ran originally in the Conversation blog and then in Quality Digest yesterday, Bilotkach considers the pros and cons of airline overbooking. And yeah, there actually are some pros to the practice, certainly for the airlines themselves. Intentional overbooking has caused load factors on domestic flights to rise from less than 80% to more than 85% over the past 10 years. Now, that works out to a lot more butts and seats on a plane, right? And that means a lot more money for the airlines. But there are some pros for passengers too, like the opportunity to sometimes score a travel voucher or some cash if your travel plans are somewhat flexible. And hey, who wouldn't want to spend an unexpected and adventurous night in a Motel 6 in Akron, Ohio, or Birmingham, Alabama, right? I mean, what could be better than that, Dirk?
Or if you're Quality Digest, it's Motel 5.5.
That's right, or even in Salt Lake City, as you almost did last night. Well, okay, so there are some significant downsides to overbooking from the passenger point of view as well. But, the thing is that volunteers can't be found to surrender their seats for a specifically overbooked flight. It's possible that you may be forced to surrender your seat and be reaccommodated, I think is the phrase, whether you have any flexibility in your plans or not. But what Bilotkach says is that there are better ways to do it. United could perhaps have simply kept upping the voluntary offer until they hit a number that people wanted and they found the 4 seats that they needed. He also suggests that maybe an auction or a name-your-own-price system could work, kind of like a price line in reverse, right? You say how much you want for your seat. That might be worthy of investigation too. I mean, whatever the cost, whatever the solution is, Bilotkach makes clear almost anything would have been better than the hit that United is taking from the way that these things went down. I mean, even bringing in a private jet and flying the 4 people who had to get onto that flight from Chicago to Louisville would have been a better choice. And those 4 people were, as it happens, actually United employees, as we're finding out now, who were needed in Louisville to work an entirely different flight, hopefully one in which no one went kicking and screaming out of the cabin doors. You know, Dirk, you can't make this stuff up.
No.
You think about it. I mean, it's like if you wrote this story 2 months ago as a fiction, people would say, that's nuts. That would never happen. Well, you know what? It actually happened. So Bilotkach, good article there. Some practical solutions. He's an economist, so he's looking at this from that perspective. And I think that it's good to realize that there's always options. Overbooking is going to happen. It makes way too much sense for the airlines. But the way they handle it when they do need seats, it could be tweaked a little bit.
So maybe they need like a good process, like, you know, something that you might find in ISO 9001. You know, I'm just saying that's probably a good segue for.
You know, it's a good segue, Dirk. It's not just a scooter.
Okay, all right. Oh, that's funny.
There you go.
All right, but as Mike mentioned at the very top of the show, we are very fortunate to have a guest with us in the studio today, who actually just happened to be passing through our neck of the woods
4 hours away
onto a conference that we'll get to in a little bit. Mike McLean, sitting to my right here, is a member of one of the ISO's Technical Management Group Task Force. And we'll talk about what that task force does here in just a little bit. And these, if you haven't heard of the ISO management, the ISO's Technical Management Board. The Management Board is the government's body for ISO that's responsible for the general management of the technical committee structure within ISO. So it's kind of a bureaucratic oversight kind of thing. Mike is the Australian representative and convener for the task force for the ISO Technical Management Board group for the integrated use of management system standards handbook. And we'll get to that handbook in just a bit because I think it's really important. And he's going to give us some insight into the benefit and the purpose of ISO's high-level structure, and then we'll also talk about the handbook in just a little bit. So let's start off with the high-level structure. First of all, why don't you tell us just briefly what is the high-level structure, or the HLS, or Annex SL? I think those are all kind of synonyms.
The high-level structure was actually from an ISO directive. The ISO directive had a number of guidance documents for technical standard writers and task forces, working groups, which I'm participating in. So in this particular case, Annex SL was just one of those within the ISO directives to say, of those people that are writing management system standards, we thought we'd do what our name is. Now, ISO means the International Organisation for Standardisation. So as my wife would say, how come you consultants talk about process and you don't do it yourself? And I've written books on problem solving, but I still have problems on my slice and my golf. So she brings it up every time. So I have problems. So then ISO took its own medicine. So they said, why don't we have some kind of standardised structure for writing management system standards? And so what we do, we get a copy of this kind of guidelines, and it has core text and some requirements. And when it comes into a special part where oil and gas or quality or environment has to put their bit in, there's just an XXX, and you just insert those requirements. So it gives flexibility for the standard writers, and it was pretty good. The basis of that was that hopefully people would say, geez, there seem to be some common elements across a number of standards. You know, quality environment, in 2017 we'll see ISO 45001 for occupational health and safety come out, but there's been asset management, energy management standards, and so people thought, geez, they were all very similar.
And so they wanted, basically they wanted a way to make sure that that kind of all of these standards had a somewhat similar structure, right? So that they could all, I'm assuming, so that they could all kind of relate to each other in some sort of way?
And that's a good thing. They have to relate, so that if you wanted to build an integrated management system, the idea of previous things called public available specifications from British Standards Institute, they have PAS 50, PAS 55, PAS 99, and they've been quite good to get people to understand those particular industries. And then we thought, well, ISO thought, how do people consolidate all those requirements and then overlay them, so to speak, or to embed them or integrate them into their processes or processes? And so what they thought was, well, we've consolidated them now. All of them now are a high-level structure thing. It makes it easy, efficient, effective for people to see. Oh, that's interesting. Quality, environment, safety, and all those types of ones. They have common cores and common kind of words about the requirements, but just there's little nuances for environmental infrastructure and things that you may want for your...
Kind of tweak them the way they need.
Yeah.
And let me interrupt you for a little bit here. We mentioned that you could, if you had any questions on the HLS or the IUMSS, that you can send them to us. We do have a question that came in, so let's go ahead and throw that up on the screen. And yeah, by the way, I'll just leave that there. If you have a question, send it to qdl@qualitydigest.com. And the first question is, can I use the high-level structure to document my QMS? And I think question. I've seen pros and cons to this. How do you answer that question?
Some organisations have done this, and as a first step, one could say that would be a great learning type of medium to say that I've looked at a standard, I've understood what the requirements are, I've written a so-called documented information. It could be in a quality manual, as you know from IATF 16949, it does require a quality manual. But you could write it and then you're saying, wait a minute, there's a clause there, 4.41, and there's another clause, 5.1c. It says I have to kind of show the interface and the interrelationship between my processes. So a flowchart's very good. It shows the where it goes and connections. That's good for understanding the process. And then it says under 4.41 that you have to understand also and document your inputs and outputs. So the procedures or work instructions then would give you greater granularity at a deeper level within that flowchart to show the inputs. A supplier gives me an input to do some transformation to produce an output. The SIPOC in ISO 9001, for example, is very powerful. So you can kind of use it to understand it, but in the end, it should be just then parked, so to speak, and then have a look at your business processes and see where those kind of now requirements you've understood, can I embed them into my business processes? And that gives you better control from Dr. Deming and Duran, process stability perhaps, better control, better assurance that you're meeting some requirement.
So if I can kind of read into what you're saying here a little bit, it sounds like you're saying that, well, if you wanted to use the HLS as a template and just try to plug everything into it, that you could do that as long as you met all the requirements of everything else. I mean, obviously there's a lot of requirements you have to meet. You could do that, but kind of why would you? What's the value in it?
Right.
Is that?
That's basically it, Dirk, because it's very powerful to read a standard, whatever standard you're meeting in whatever industry, and probably write it out. So you've got to understand it. But then when you read it, you then realise, wait a minute, we run our business by processes. We have to produce an output. How can we have better control? How do we meet customer satisfaction? How do we meet our interested parties' needs and expectations? We have to do continual improvement. Well, you can't do continual improvement on a clause or a requirement.
Right.
You have to do continual improvement of your processes.
Well, and you mentioned process, and actually before I get going, and Christopher, I've lost audio on my headset here, so if another question comes in, just flag me at the door there if you don't mind. So you mentioned processes, and one thing that we do a lot of webinars. Various consultants or registrars come in, they do webinars, and one of the questions that always comes up is auditing. So how does an auditor audit a process? I mean, I would think they could come in, they could very easily, in the old days when ISO 9001 was basically kind of a checkbox kind of thing.
Tick and flick.
That's pretty, tick and flick. That's pretty easy. But now you're saying, well, it's not really, you're not using this template. The auditor's got to come in, they've got to look at your process, they've got to understand it. How the heck does that work for an auditor to really understand your process and see how it relates back to the standard?
Respective standard. There's two aspects of the ISO high-level structure which are very important for auditors. First of all is the internal auditor. The internal auditors, you still have to be competent, you have to be trained. The power and the value of an internal auditor now was because you have your processes defined and you have procedures to show you how you control that process. That can be captured in an ISO 10005 quality plan. So you say, this is how we do things. So the internal auditor would be then going through and having a look at their processes and procedures as to whether the machines and gauges and office infrastructure is in place to deliver different activities within that process. Now that's the internal audit side, and that's a conformance. Do we conform to what we say we should do? Right. Like you're in United Airlines, do we conform to the policy, the procedures? Well, actually, every airline has the same policy as United Airlines.
Right.
Just to back on that, there was another requirement that the airline, if they don't have their crew to meet the deadline at the other airport, they miss their slot, and the cost to the business is very big. But there were risk mitigation things they could take. So the other part of ISO 9001, it talks about risk and opportunities and risk-based thinking. So within the risk-based thinking, there's no preventive action.
Right.
But when you think about it, as that United Airlines type thing, every aspect of leadership, planning, support, performance evaluation covered risk-based thinking. Maybe some people weren't really thinking through the downstream impact, but back to the internal audit. The internal audit is very powerful. Now, the management system or the business systems manager has to look at meeting some external requirement. So the external requirement could be for quality, environment, safety, or it could be for something which has nothing to do with ISO. So our integrated use of management system standards is also recognising that many organisations have to meet other standards, nothing to do with ISO. That might be for food, it might be for transport responsibility, for anything, RFID or some standard. So people operate their business internal audit ways, you have to meet those requirements, so to speak. If you want to seek certification or registration, well, let's just have a look at that standard and as to whether we should then go for a compliance. Do we comply to something? So the external auditor, and there's many tools and techniques that they can use, and I think, Dirk, we might say that it's important now, it's an imperative that the external auditor really understands the industry.
Well, and that was, I guess that's what I was getting to is that usually what happens? Somebody comes. Let's say you're involved in the food industry in some way. You're food packaging or you make cheese or something like that. Yeah. If the auditor who comes in doesn't understand the food industry and HACCP and all that sort of stuff, are they going to understand whether or not your processes meet or don't meet the requirements of ISO 9001? And I guess to extend that further, if as a company that's being audited, I'm thinking, this auditor doesn't seem like they get what we do, is there anything you can do about it?
Actually, there's the requirement by the registration certification body that they are required by their governance, as you said before, they are required to provide an auditor who actually knows that industry. That is a requirement. And your registrar bodies here in the United States and around the world, for Australia it's JASANS, they have to make sure that certification body does provide the right auditor for the right industry. And it's a good point. I'm automotive, so I was trained in the United States. So if I went into a food company and I mentioned APQP, PPAP and FMEA, and they're just going to go, what the hell is that? But I have to kind of be, as a management consultant, because I'm not an auditor, I'd have to kind of understand the context of the organisation, their processes, and understand how I can best apply some particular thing in regards, some management practice. If I'm a lead auditor, I have to understand that standard. And what the businesses want is the benefit of an external auditor who understands the standard, but also my industry. So how can I use this kind of compliance requirement by a standard, and how can our processes better meet that? So the auditor can use a range of techniques. You've had them in the Quality Digest, turtle diagrams or bow tie diagrams or anything to kind of gather your processes, show me what you do, I'll write out what I think is required by this, also show me your documentation. Have you integrated the requirements of a particular standard I'm going to look at, and then say, okay, let's have a look. I'm going to walk your process. So usually the internal auditor has already done that, and that's very powerful as a value add, function divided by the price paid. But for the external auditor, when they've finished that audit, they've walked the process, go to Gemba, so to speak. Then they come back to that business systems manager for whatever system they're putting in and say, look, you are doing what you're doing, but you could get better control by looking at this requirement of the standard. You said you did, but I couldn't find any evidence. So, and they have to read back the standard, and the business systems manager would then say, gee, we missed that. We missed that in our process.
But what you're saying is, I mean, that you keep on repeating is this idea that the ownership of the processes really belong to the company themselves that are to be audited. I mean, too many times I think companies want to offload that to the auditor and tell us what we're doing wrong or tell us what we should be doing. That's not the way it's supposed to work. No. And you're supposed to own that yourself, and then the audit, the external audit, is really just a check that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing.
And that's a good point, Mike. I think what's happened is that the quality manager or the environmental manager has been kind of decoupled from the main part of the business. And there is a narrative around now that how can we make the business systems manager part of the management review? So as Tom Peters said back in those In Search of Excellence days, if quality's not at the top of the agenda, you're not serious about quality or anything like that. I think now there's an opportunity for the business systems manager to be at that table, to be at the C-suite. Are there any risk in my business? What happens to United Airlines? What happens if we make a decision that we're going to execute this on behalf of the security? Because if you, Tom Peters, you've accepted it, you've improved it. They approved that airport security. They approved of the policy. So therefore, we can't necessarily blame the person, so to speak. And as Dr. Deming says, you blame the process, not the person.
Well, the red bead experiment.
Be the experiment. and that's part of the thing. So the business systems manager now has an opportunity to be at the table, but also the companies would see value in that business systems manager, giving us a more eclectic, holistic view of how we're not meeting or are meeting requirements for some standard. And instead of just being tick, flick, and just forget about it.
Well, do you think, in your experience, do you think that most auditors understand how to audit to the process approach? What would you say, how would you say, like 50% are doing it right, or 70% are doing it right, or?
Once again, that's a telling question, because the experience has been that there's going to be a bit of a change for the auditors. Some companies and clients that we have, and it's been the experience by our task force, so we've got some 30 nations on this, they have found what you've just said, that not all auditors actually understand this thing about process. They need to understand the standard, and that's what businesses want. They want that auditor to really know the standard, but they also want us to know our business process, our industry. So right now in Milan, in Italy, there's a ISO meeting and task force revising the auditing standards and so forth. I can tell you that there's a big issue about the competence of people and the auditors to understand the organisation's processes, so that they have to understand that industry, that sector, that culture, whatever the context is. Some of the organisations in the Middle East we've found that they don't understand, like, even the context of the organisation. So it does say in ISO 9001, for example, which I'll get back to your point, notes 2 and 3 about external factors and internal factors. Well, those in strategy know, well, isn't that a bit like SWOT and PESTEL? Yeah. And for some organisations, that the executives, they're millionaires. They've never been to a university, and they just said, gee, this is really good stuff. And how do I rank all these strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities? Well, you just rank the weaknesses, rank the threats, and then put them into your business plan. And gee, that's a good idea. Is this all new knowledge? No, but so what's happening is the auditors are having to see, is there a business plan? Some don't know what a business plan is. So there's a re-education of lead auditors in certification bodies going on right now. And when ISO publishes the revised standard for auditing and so forth, it's going to be an interesting time. And I think it's a great opportunity for the auditing fraternity to kind of lift their game. But it's coming to another thing. They're going to see more integrated management systems.
Well, let's talk about that. So the reason you're out here actually is for a meeting you're going to in Michigan. Tell us about that and what that's all about.
So I'm going to Milwaukee to Johnson Controls. Craig Williams and his team have organised us to be there. And there's a smaller task force now. We're just in the final stages of updating the handbook. We've got a lot of the inputs.
And what is the handbook?
The handbook is the Integrated User Management System Standards, published in 2008. The high-level structure came in kind of after that, and we've realised that we kind of have to refresh it. The 15 case studies that we had, we're getting some are continuing. They want to show that we've improved our process-based or integrated management systems, but we've got some new case studies. And the way with technology, with ICT people use iPads. You can go into some organisations now. There's no documents. There's just an iPad, and there's click, do their job. And one of my clients does that in a laboratory, making biomedical DNA, genome, knockout mice. That's all done by an iPad. It's all timed. They also use nucleonics, so it's important to get the timing exposure right. So, but basically organisations and what we've got a range of case studies which are going to be imported into this book, and they're going to be used.
And what's the purpose of the purpose of the book is why would I use this manual? What's this manual showing me?
Right. So part of this issue of the Integrated Use of Management Systems Handbook was it was written basically around ISO stuff.
Okay.
So that the ISO standards, that's what we thought, but there's other standards. So every business operates their management system. They have a management system. Some seek certification to something external. So the original book was basically focused on management systems and ISO standards. And we've now realised that with ERPs, business process management, or ETOMs and ITIL 3s and other various standards, nothing to do with ISO sometimes, that organisations have to operate in this context. They have to meet some external requirement. So our handbook is now being revised. One is a construct around the high-level structure, as a construct, but not to document. So the words in the ISO directive said, this is for ISO technical committees, working groups, to design a management system standard or whatever. It is not for organisations to document it. It actually says this is only for us people in ISO. So what we're going to do, we've got all these case studies now at different parts of the handbook. We've got new and refreshed process maps, process matrices. We're integrating some performance evaluation, a balanced scorecard with Kaplan Norton's kind of been now accepted. So under performance evaluation, you could use that. So what's happening is we're also going to have this refreshing of a Jim the Baker case study. Okay. So we have to make it not just for developed nations, but for developing nations, for small businesses and big businesses.
So the idea of the manual is it gives people an example of how, if they have multiple management systems, how they can all be pulled together. Is that the idea?
Yeah,
I'm still trying to get my head around what the manual's going to do for me, for instance.
The reason we have so many case studies is that you will see different varieties of ways of doing it. There's no one right way to do an integrated management system, or some people call it just a single management system.
Okay.
This is the way we operate our business.
So this kind of shows different ways.
Yeah.
You could go about it this way, you could go about it that way. It could be for one management system, or you could be trying to integrate 18,001, 14,001, and 9,001, and you might take this kind of approach, kind of thing, right?
And some of the examples we've got are so innovative and creative and just out of this world. Like there's one that's got a one-page kind of quality plan, but it's actually an integrated management plan, and it's the whole manual in one A3 sheet.
Okay.
And you think, my goodness, how does that work? Well, it does work, because what they've done, all the backroom work has been done to show how various management system requirements have been embedded and integrated within their business processes. And then what they do is they publish this one page for everybody to understand, including a plan on the page, which I do as a consultant. So business plans on a page now are quite popular. It's been around for years, but they might use 3 horizons or something, and how do we put that together, or blue oceans, red oceans, and all that, and how do we compete? So you can see that our management systems are quite evolving and changing. So our handbook is also going to show how that happened. What it also does is Jim the Baker, which was just a small bakery we had in the original book. Well, Jim the Baker's kind of, it could stay what it is, but as you know, you come around here to Chico, you've got people that are an in-store bakery for one of the major retail stores.
Sure.
And so he might decide, because his personal situation or her personal situation, either a husband or wife or family, they said, I might put my bakery into an in-store one. Or I've got an opportunity to take over another bakery in Chico, or I might go to Sacramento, I might go somewhere else. So I could, because I'm so good at this, and this process is so good, I franchise it, just like, some coffee shop. Right. So you have this thing, opportunities. So we had to embrace that. So we have to kind of show that Jim the Baker has an opportunity to do franchising or something like that. So we're not kind of saying that this is the way. It's no one right way.
And when does the revision come out?
Well, my task by the end of next Friday, or I should say my team's task, is that our team is meant to have a draft of this finished by Friday next week in Milwaukee. We also have a survey. We have the Integrated Use of Management System Questionnaire survey. It's been going around the world, and people can still participate in that.
How do they do that?
They just go online as a Survey Monkey, so I'll show you, give you the link.
Yep.
We're getting some amazing responses.
We'll post that in
We'll share that. We'll share that.
And it's been quite refreshing. And sometimes you think, oh, this is what will happen. Well, we've got so much diverse point of view. So we're going to have that done by Friday. We have to consolidate that. On Wednesday next week, the American Society for Quality has also been very gracious. They're putting on, I'm not sure about bagels, but they got us having a half a dozen to 10 organisations from the Milwaukee area, the region, and they're coming we're going to conduct a focus group. So we're going to put up the aspects of what we've drafted of the handbook now, some of the case studies, some of the approaches, and also get their feedback of what they think is real. We've done this in Australia with a company, which is a bakery, and that little company, Pinnacle Ingredients down there in Sydney, they're not ISO, but they have to meet HACCP, they have to meet food standards for Woolworths and Coles and all these patisseries. So, but now those people want fresh cream. Well, that changes your whole process because you've got something fresh. So we have to have small companies, medium-sized companies, companies that are multinational. So we want that feedback. So we're going to get that on Wednesday next week. So they're coming in, and then we have to present to the Technical Management Board around October, likely in Sydney, and also the joint JTCG. There's a committee that's kind of associated with that.
And all this to get like the revisions into and so then once the revisions are in and everything's in there, this is actually a document that'll be downloadable from the ISO website, I'm assuming?
For a fee.
Well, of course.
The original one, you can't even find it on the ISO website. Right. So the handbook was quite substantive before. We're going to kind of break it up a little bit better. And also, a lot of the companies that have participated in the survey have given us a link to their system. Okay. So you can directly contact them. We're not sure about putting the web links in because, as you know, sometimes the web link changes. And,
right.
And
but are you saying that the manual will be available this time from ISO at some point for a fee?
Oh yeah, it will be, and that's the objective. We have to get that through. It has to go through the review by a high level group, the governance of the TMB. I directly report to them, which is an onerous task, and we have to be cognizant of what they say to fix it. So there's some people back to the high level structure. Yep. I'm sure we're going to get some people, why isn't like the high level structure? Right. Where's PDCA? And other people also have their points of view, which is what we have to do. And I suppose being Australian, we have to kind of be in the middle. So we've got the Asian context, we've got the European, and now we've got Brexit, and now we've got other things that have happened around the world. And I do work for the Department of Defence in Australia and the different services. So cyber security is big, information security has come in, ISO 27001. So we have to be kind of eclectic and holistic about it. And
so we'll keep our eyes open. We got to go now. But we'll keep our eyes open. Yeah. So they should just check into ISO. Yeah. And it'll be called the IUMSS. Yeah. Probably if they just go onto ISO and Google.
Yeah, that'll come out by.
Use the ISO search box.
And we'll post the survey.
And we'll post the survey.
That'd be really great, Mike.
Underneath our player page
who are watching on demand will be able to check that out as well.
Okay. Mike, thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. We could talk about this for a long time, but we're running out here.
Thanks very much.
Okay. All right. Well, that's our show for the week. Before we go, we want to thank our sponsor. Mitutoyo Corporation is the world's largest provider of measurement and inspection solutions, offering the most complete selection of machines, sensors, systems, and services, with a line encompassing CMMs, vision, form, and finish measuring machines, as well as precision tools and instruments and metrology data management software. Mitutoyo's nationwide network of metrology centers and support operations provides application, calibration, service repair, and educational programs to ensure that their more than 6,000 metrology products will deliver measurement solutions for their customers. For more information, visit www.mitutoyo.com or click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
That's it. All right. Well, thanks all of you again for joining us. Mike, thanks for joining us.
That's right.
Appreciate it. Glad to be back. Made it home.
That's right.
All right. And we will see all of you again next week on Quality Digest Live.
See you then.
Bye.